US-China tensions are rising once again. Scott Bessent says China cannot be trusted. China says recent US actions have undermined their trade talks. Wall Street thinks Trump will taco again. But will he? Can he? And what should you be doing with your money right now? For whatever the reason, Wall Street's worst nightmare about Trump's trade war has so far failed to materialize. The IMF this week raises forecasts for the 2025 global real GDP growth to 3.2%, up from 3% in July and a gloomy 2.8% in April. The IMF is not alone. Wall Street has been steadily revising up its own forecast for the major economies since April. One country stands out from the crowd. China leads all major economies in the size of forecast revision by Wall Street economists since April. Wall Street banks now expect China to grow 4.8% this year, which will be barely slower than the 5% pace recorded in 2024. That's remarkable, given that Trump's tariffs on Chinese goods are larger and were implemented earlier than those imposed on any other country. What does the seeming resilience of the Chinese economy mean? Will it last? Trump's trade war was designed to exact a heavy price from China. The hefty increase in the tariff rate on Chinese goods was only one part of it. Trump is also using the trade war to increase pressure on other countries to stop buying from China. For example, the US got Vietnam to agree to impose a 40% tariff on the so-called transshipment trade. And Mexico is now considering matching US tariffs on China, including a 50% tariffs on Chinese cars. It should come as no surprise that Chinese exports to the US have fallen off the cliff. On a year-on-year comparison, Chinese exports to the US in September were down 27%. US imports from China are now barely 10% of total US imports, the lowest level in more than 20 years. Chinese industrial production has slowed, from 6% at the start of the year to 5% in August. But so far, China has managed to avoid a sharper downturn in manufacturing, in part thanks to the fact that China has managed to increase its market shares elsewhere. Chinese exports to the European Union grew by 14% in September, while those to Southeast Asia increased by 16%. Chinese exports of smartphones are down sharply, but Chinese exports of vehicles increased by 24% in September, integrated circuits by 17%, and LCD panels by 12%. One might suspect that this impressive growth is the result of aggressive discounting by Chinese manufacturers. But the data suggests otherwise. Chinese industrial profits rebounded sharply in August, increasing by 20%, following 3 consecutive months of decline. So how have Chinese manufacturing firms managed to offset the negative impact of Trump's trade war? Especially given that domestic demand is weak, with retail sales growing just 3.5%. The only possible explanation is an increase in productivity growth. According to a report released last month by the International Federation of Robotics, there are now more than 2 million robots working in Chinese factories. China installed nearly 300,000 new robots last year, more than the rest of the world combined. In my view, the seeming resilience of the Chinese economy to Trump's trade war has much to do with China's decade-long push into factory automation and AI. What doesn't kill me makes me stronger, as Nietzsche famously said. Trump's trade war against China during his first presidency accelerated China's diversification into high value-added advanced manufacturing. This is paying off nicely against Trump's second trade war. Tension between the US and China is rising again after a 6-month trade truce. Last week, China announced expanded curbs on the export of rare earths, sending a shockwave through industries from defense contractors to automakers. Chinese official statements suggest the action is a direct response to the decision by the US to tighten China-related export sanctions on September 29th. Trump threatened to hit China with an additional 100% tariff if it goes ahead with the rare earth restriction that is scheduled to go into effect on November 1st. Wall Street does not seem too concerned. The market is assuming that the two sides will work things out before November 1st. I'm less confident. Or at least I don't think it will be so easy. And this is why. China is in a stronger position than it was in April. It's coped with the US tariffs much better than expected. In contrast, the US is in a weaker position than it was in April. Hiring has slowed sharply, and there are few signs that the tariffs are helping the import competing sectors. Manufacturing lost 12,000 jobs in August. The auto industry and the furniture industry, the two industries that should be the biggest beneficiaries of Trump's tariff, shed 10,000 jobs. What this means is that Trump's threat of even higher tariffs is both less credible and less threatening to China. My guess is that for the Chinese to agree to keeping the supply of rare earths flowing, the US will have to retract its September 29 decision on extending restrictions to subsidiaries majority owned by entity-list firms. There are good reasons to think that this may be going too far, even for Taco Trump. Marco Rubio called China the most potent and dangerous adversary of the United States. No doubt he's right. If there's one policy continuity from Biden to Trump, it is the containment of China, especially when it comes to limiting China's access to sensitive technologies. Eric Schmidt, former Google CEO, once said that export controls were keeping the US ahead of China in AI by 2 to 3 years, and he called the gap an eternity. It's becoming more and more clear that this is no longer the case. Jensen Huang, the CEO of NVIDIA, said a few weeks ago that China is only a nanosecond behind the US in AI and semiconductors. In this respect, the Commerce Department's decision to extend restrictions to subsidiaries majority owned by entity-list firms can be viewed as an acknowledgement by the Trump administration of China's progress. This is why I find it difficult to believe that Trump will walk back over the new rule. This is why also I think there's a real chance that China will go through with the export restrictions of rare earths. The issue between the two rivals is no longer about trade. It is about technology. Continued US economic hegemony depends on its ability to keep China behind. For China, a multipolar world depends on its ability to level the playing field. I think the stock market may be underestimating what is at stake for the two rivals before and after November 1st. Thank you for listening.